Howdy everyone, and today I'm covering a lens that a lot of people have asked me to look at. The Tamron SP-AF 28-75mm f2.8 XR-DI-LD aspherical IF lens. Tamron's marketing people must have impressive lung capacities. It's a popular lens for three reasons. Firstly, it's a fast standard zoom lens for full-frame digital or film cameras, and those are always in demand. Its f2.8 maximum aperture means that the lens lets in quite a lot of light, and you can also get quite blurry, out-of-focus backgrounds at f2.8. Its zoom range of 28 to 75mm covers all your bases, from wide-angle to short telephoto. Although it's hardly all-encompassing, and personally I much prefer to use lenses that start at 24mm. If you're using a more common APS-C digital camera, then that zoom range is a bit awkward because you won't be getting any wide-angle pictures if you're starting at 28mm. This really does work best as a full-frame camera lens. Also, as you can see in this video footage, the lens doesn't have image stabilization, so it's not a good piece of kit for handheld video work. At the same time though, that probably accounts for the second reason this lens is so popular. It's very inexpensive. You can find it for as low as £250 new, and I got mine on eBay for only £170, about $300. Canon's current fast standard zoom lens for full frame costs about 5 or 6 times as much money. And the third reason this Tamron lens is popular is because it's reputed to have good image quality. Well, we'll be the judge of that. Firstly though, let's look at the build quality. The Tamron is surprisingly small and light, especially compared to one of Canon's zoom lenses, as you can see here, and that's a major bonus. It's made of plastic and it's not particularly tough, but it does feel quite solid. The zoom ring turns evenly, but it's not particularly smooth. The focus ring does turn quite smoothly, but it only travels a very short distance, making precise focusing a little tricky. Switch the lens to autofocus and the ring locks in place. Don't try to force it around. Happily, the front element of the lens does not extend or rotate as you focus. The autofocus motor is averagely fast and pretty noisy too. Thankfully, in all my testing it focused pretty accurately, which is the main thing. Overall, the lens is fairly solid. It's not a piece of junk, and I love its small size. But it's hardly a quality product either, and that autofocus system is definitely a bit yesterday. Anyway, let's look at image quality. We'll start on a full-frame camera, a 20MP Canon 6D. At 28mm and f2.8, the lens is very sharp indeed in the middle of the image. It's actually pretty sharp across the whole image frame until you reach the extreme corners, where we see a lot of softness and darkness, although not much in the way of chromatic aberration. Stop the lens down to f4 and there's a good improvement, and stop down to f5.6 for bitingly sharp corners. So at 28mm the lens is always very sharp in the middle, but the corners need a bit of stopping down before they impress too. Let's zoom in halfway to 50mm. Even at f2.8, the lens remains very sharp in the middle of the image. The corners are just okay. They're not quite as bad as they were at 28mm. Stop down to f4 and there's a good improvement, and again at f5.6 the lens is bitingly sharp in those corners, and even the middle of the image frame is looking a touch sharper. So we get a slightly better performance at 50mm. The lens is doing quite well. Let's zoom all the way into 75mm, and it's about the same story as at 50mm. From f2.8 the lens is very sharp in the middle, and the corners are just okay. At f4 they look better, and at f5.6 they're very good, although not quite perfect. We see fantastic image quality back in the middle of the image frame. Overall, the Tamron 28-75mm gives very pleasing results for image quality. It's always very sharp in the middle of the image, and stop the aperture down to f5.6 for excellent image quality across the whole frame. Also, it doesn't really show much chromatic aberration. On a full-frame camera, for the money you're paying, the lens is good. Well, like I said before, putting this lens on an APS-C camera isn't the most practical idea because its zoom range won't really cover wide angles. But here's a test anyway, in case you're so inclined. We'll challenge this lens with the 20 megapixel sensor of my Canon 70D. At 28mm and f2.8, the lens is pretty sharp in the middle of the image, and the corners look pretty good too, better than they did on full frame. However, chromatic aberration, also known as color fringing, is a bit more noticeable on contrasting edges this time. Stop down to f4 for excellent sharpness in the corners, and even more back in the middle too. That's as sharp as this lens gets at 28mm. Let's zoom in to 50mm. At f2.8, the lens is averagely sharp in the middle, and about the same in the corners. Stop down to f4 for much better sharpness, and at f5.6, there's a further boost in resolution, also noticeable in the middle of the image. So the lens performs excellently, but only when stopped down a bit. Let's zoom all the way into 75mm. At f2.8, the sharpness levels are just good. The corners of the image are looking a little soft, unfortunately, although we're still not seeing any chromatic aberration. Stop down to f4 and there's a good improvement, and at f5.6 the image quality is very good indeed, especially back in the middle of the image. So on an APS-C camera, the lens is huffing and puffing a bit at f2.8 to give us decent resolution. But stop the aperture down to f4, or even better, f5.6, and you can get some very rewarding picture quality. Let's test distortion and vignetting levels. They're not really a problem on APS-C cameras, so let's see how the lens performs on full frame. At 28mm we see some barrel distortion. It's noticeable, but it's not too bad for a zoom lens of this type. Unfortunately though, we see some quite sharp and pronounced vignetting in the corners of the image. Even stopped down to f4, it doesn't completely go away. Zoom in to 35mm and that distortion is almost gone, and when you reach 75mm we see some noticeable pincushion distortion. Again, the corners are rather dark, and even stopping down to f4 doesn't get rid of that vignetting. So overall, it's an averagely good performance for distortion, but the lens struggles with getting even illumination into those corners. The lens can focus as close as 33cm, which isn't bad. At f2.8, the close-up picture quality is, unfortunately, a bit soft. Stop down to f4 for a major improvement, and f5.6 for really sharp macro pictures. The lens performs reasonably well when working against bright lights, particularly at wide angles. When you're zoomed in, you do lose a bit of contrast, but for a lens of this type, that's a better performance than normal. As I mentioned at the beginning, this lens can give you some good out-of-focus backgrounds, particularly on a full-frame camera. The quality of its bokeh is very nice and smooth in nearly all situations. You certainly won't be getting any nasty surprises here. Overall, I think this Tamron lens deserves its popularity. For the price you pay, you'll be getting very nice image quality and very striking pictures, and all in a small, lightweight package. Its weaknesses are strong vignetting and soft corners at f2.8 on a full-frame camera, and also it's not a very suitable choice in general for APS-C cameras. However, it is mostly quite sharp and rewarding to use, so if you're looking for a cheap zoom lens for your full-frame digital or film camera, then this is a very nice option indeed.